Last week, somebody had a question on how many people actually were removed on the Trail of Tears, how many people perished. So that's an interesting question. I want to look up the numbers, which I actually did. And so I went through various sources, but I decided that I'll settle with the number actually given by the Native nations. So did a presentation. Let me get my PowerPoint here. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let's see if I can do it right. Okay, the five civilized tribes were removed from the southeast uh, from about 1818 to 1859. The Cherokee actually, some went voluntarily at first, I think as early as 1818. And the last group removed uh, was after the Third Seminole War, there's a group of Seminoles that left in 1859. So let's look at these. The five civilized tribes are known as the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminoles. And this would include groups, subgroups within them, like the Creeks and Seminoles also have the Uchis, the Apalachicolas, and groups within there. All these nations are represented in the state of Oklahoma today and have sovereign nations, but they also have survivors that survived. We know the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. They're connected culturally, but they're not under the same government authority. Just as the Creek Nation in Oklahoma, and there's unknown number of Creek survivors in the tri-state area of Georgia, Alabama, Florida. The Cherokee, very well known. We know about the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, Northeast Oklahoma, and Tahlequah. And we know about the Eastern Cherokee in North Carolina and Tennessee. So the Cherokee, of course, are usually what people think of in the Trail of Tears. And this number comes from the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. You can look it up on their webpage. 16,000 were removed from North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. Estimated about 4,000 died along the way, or 25%. They went in the winter. They're held up in stockades in North Carolina and marched from their home up to Illinois and down to Oklahoma. Uh, Very terrible. We're all probably familiar with the history. The Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. Choctaw Nation, about 20,000 were removed, mostly from Mississippi. There's maybe some in western Alabama, northern Louisiana. Estimate about 2,500 died during the removal, or 12.5%. They did not have to go as far as the Cherokee, so the percentage that died in the removal for them was only half the percentage that perished that the Cherokee had. The Creeks, the largest group, removed terrible land fraud, removed from Florida. About 23,000 Creeks were removed from Alabama and Georgia. In the 1830s, estimated about 3,500 died along the way, or 15% mortality. Uh, they're the worst case of, I guess, fraud uh, and land speculators stole their land when the 700 Creek militia regiment joined with the United States to fight the Seminoles in Florida. Their women and children left in Alabama were attacked by Alabama militia, and I believe that was in Polecat Springs. And then so they were moved down in Fort Morgan on the Gulf Barrier Islands, but they're still not safe there. They still had people taking advantage of them there. So terrible time. The Chickasaw, only about is much smaller but well known. The Chickasaw, 4,000 removed from Alabama and Tennessee, estimated about 500 died, or 12.5%, the same percentage as the Choctaw. The Chickasaw and Choctaw were actually allies of the United States, fought on the side of the United States in the War of 1812 and against the Creeks and Seminoles. The Chickasaw actually at one point saved Andrew Jackson's army by providing food and shoes when he was stranded in Alabama, and still they were removed. But the thing about the Chickasaw, they organized the removal themselves and were not swindled and stranded and starved by the contractors as badly as the Creek and the Seminole. The Seminoles, speaking of which, now the previous four nations, those numbers actually come from their nation webpage that you can look them up. And it verifies with other sources that you can look up elsewhere. These numbers for the Seminole I actually saw in the congressional record years ago. It said that 4,200 Seminoles were removed from Florida, and then it says 3,500 arrived in Oklahoma and were settled in Oklahoma. That means 700 perished or died along the way, a very high percentage, 16.7%. Of course, they probably had the longest way to go of any of the tribes that was removed, distance-wise from their homeland, except just remember that the Cherokee did not go straight route to Oklahoma. They went up to Illinois and down the Mississippi. Now, some of the Seminoles that the United States forcibly removed got away, and the most famous we have to mention, Polly Parker. She died in Florida in 1922. Estimated her age was between 113 and 130 years old. This newspaper clipping is from November 1922. She was a guest of honor at the Sundance Festival in Palm Beach County, West Palm Beach. At the same time, she is also a guest of honor at the American Legion Convention. So she was quite a celebrity, being touted as the oldest woman in the Seminole Nation. And what she did is that when she was removed, I think it might have been with Billy Bowleg's group in 1858, when the ship stopped at St. Mark's in the Panhandle to take on either water for the steamboat or maybe wood, Polly Parker and some of the Seminole women were allowed to get off the boat, disembark, and go gather herbs and things that they needed to treat the ill and sick people that were on the boat. And she kept on running, made it all the way back down to Okeechobee, about 400 miles. And maybe a few of the other women escaped as well, but she's the most famous. Then when the Seminoles were in New Orleans, I think this was on one of the earlier removals in the 1830s, there was a few, they said they were Spaniards, probably Spanish Indians. They told the army that they refused to go any further, and so they were allowed to remain in the city of New Orleans. The Black Seminoles that were removed in 1838, they were kept prisoner in Fort Pike, kind of south of town, and they were kept prisoner while the court was going on with the court case with the slave owners to try to have them put back into slavery. Finally, General Gaines got tired of dealing with them in the court case, told the officer to go take them, and so they went off to Indian Territory with the sheriff and the slave owners chasing behind them. The Black Seminoles made it to Fort Gibson and Indian Territory, but they still had problems there and had to go down to Mexico to escape the slave owners that were still after them there. Now, the total number of the 5 civilized tribes that were removed from the Southeast was 67,000. Estimated 11,200 died, or 16.7%. And so that's like the same percentage mortality that the Seminoles had. Of course, this includes, with the five civilized tribes, these subgroups they had, like Yuchi and Apalachicola. This total number is not the total number removed to Indian Territory. This is just the five civilized tribes. It does not include others like the Shawnee, the Potawatomi, the Apache, and others that are still present in Oklahoma today. All these nations have representation in Oklahoma. You can visit them today. Nearly all of them have museums. I think there's about 40 nations in Oklahoma that are established. And of course, we know like the Cherokee and the Seminoles, there are some that fought and remained in their homeland as well. But the majority of them are in Oklahoma. What does that mean according to the population? In the 1830s, 1820s, and 30s, the United States estimated the Seminole population in Florida about 5,000. Florida census from 1830, and this is the non-native Indian population, it was only 34,730 people. In fact, there's a book in the libraries I've seen that have the names of the names of the census. It's like 30 pages. It's just a short booklet. In order to be a state, I think you need 45,000 people at that point, or 50,000. So if 4,200 Seminoles were removed from Florida compared to a population of 34,000, that's like 12% of the population that is removed from Florida at 1830 numbers. That is a huge percentage of the population that's removed from their home and taken 1,000 miles away. Now, what does that look like if it happened today, given the present population of Florida? The present sorry. Okay, the present population of Florida is 22 million. 12% of today's population would be 2.7 million. Now, the good comparison is city of Miami and Miami-Dade County. If 12% of the population was removed from Florida today, that's taking the whole population of Miami-Dade County and removing them from Florida. Now, if they're taken 1,000 miles from home and 16.7 of the population dies along the way, that would be equivalent to losing 450,900, or similar to the current population of Miami that would not survive the trip. So can you imagine what it's like with the current population of Florida to remove 2.7 million people from Florida, take them 1,000 miles from home, and equivalent to the population of the city of Miami to perish along the way? That is a huge number, and that kind of gives you an idea of what it was like of the Seminoles being removed from Florida. Just imagine what it was with the larger tribes, the Cherokee tribe that removed 16,000, or the Creek tribe that removed 23,000. What a huge number that would be. If it was done today with the same percentage of the population, it would be millions. So that gives you an idea. And also, it kind of explains why the government was so badly on getting the people food and getting them stranded, why it handled it so badly. It was just not up to the task to get the people safely along the way. And that's the presentation. There's a lot more that could be said, but we can get off on a lot of tangents. So I just wanted to give the numbers straight up from the Native nations themselves. which can be verified with numbers from other sources to give you an idea of what the numbers were of the people that are removed on the Trail of Tears comparing it to today's population. So I hope this can be educational for someone.